The vote will take place tomorrow.
So, the next item on the agenda is the joint debate on foreign security and defence policy. The report from Mr. Gala, the report from Mr. McAllister, and the declaration from the Vice President of the Commission and High Representative. We'll start with Mr. McAllister, the rapporteur. You have the floor for 4 minutes.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, dear Federica Mogherini, in your global strategy of June 2016, you defined the times we live in today as, quote, the times of predictable unpredictability, unquote, and I believe that you were and you are right in your analysis. The different situations we are facing in our eastern neighborhood, in our southern neighborhood, in the Middle East, in large parts of Africa, in North Korea, or how we will be able to convince ourselves at tomorrow's Sakharov Prize ceremony in Latin America, as well as our challenging relations with Russia and China, are all emerging as a huge political challenge for our Union and our member states. With this annual report on common security and defence policy, we try to identify the major issues our Union faces and outline a possible way forward. Dear colleagues, according to the last survey conducted by Eurobarometer, 65% of the Europeans are in favour of a common European foreign policy, while even 75% are in favour of a common security and defence policy. The European Union ought to deliver on the expectations of its citizens. In my report, and it's the first report I've presented, I focused on the 3 C's. Firstly, coordination of an assessment of the profound threats and challenges within the EU. I believe we have to scrutinise the current political and security environment and take measures to guarantee the security of our people and our territory. This will foremost be achieved by stabilising our direct neighbourhood, such as the Western Balkans, by promoting reforms and tackling the root causes of armed conflicts. The second C, consolidation and deepening of the European project through enhanced EU capabilities. The European Union, as we all know, is the biggest market in the world, a major political and diplomatic power, the first trade partner for most of the countries and regions in the world, and the first humanitarian and development donor worldwide. I am convinced that only a coherent, coordinated action across these EU policies can harness the EU's collective force. And finally, the third C, cooperation within coalitions and with institutions delivering security. The European Union must continue to develop its strategic autonomy and to create its own capabilities to better address regional and international conflicts. In an increasingly conflict-ridden and unstable international environment, only a combination of effective multilateralism, our soft power, and our credible hard power can be capable of confronting those major security threats. A final remark. Yesterday's agreement to establish the permanent structured cooperation marked a huge step forward towards an independent and strong EU security and defence policy, and thus to a certain degree of hard power. Finally, I would like to thank my shadow rapporteurs for the good and fruitful cooperation. It was a pleasure to witness that the largest political groups in this House collaborate closely towards a stronger common foreign and security policy of our Union. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'll now give the floor to the other rapporteur, Mr. Gala. 4 minutes as well.
Grazie Presidente. Annunzio vobis gaudium.
We have a CSDP, white smoke after 8 years, finally. It has been a demand from this Parliament for many years, and we're seeing permanent structured cooperation finally implemented by the Council. Mrs. Mogherini, you worked together with the Member States and Council for just a few months. We've been working on this since 2009, since entry into the force of the Lisbon Treaty. Mr. Danjean raised this issue and called on member states to kick off PESCO. We had support across many groups, and in 2016 we had a report on the Defence Union, and PESCO was mentioned as the cornerstone of this European Defence Union. The Defence Union is designed to ensure that we take matters into our own hand to safeguard the security of our citizens and the European Union. The Defence Union is enshrined in provisions of the Lisbon Treaty. We can work towards a common defence union, common defence policy, thanks to the Lisbon Treaty, which has been adopted by 28 governments and ratified by 28 parliaments. So we don't need a new treaty, we're just implementing the provisions adopted years ago. Let me say that the options of our EU treaty are in line with the NATO requirements and commitments. We can indeed strengthen our NATO commitments. The Commission has produced a paper on defence, and we talk about cooperation, the European Union supporting cooperation, offering incentives so that member states can work together on research, defence capabilities, ensure greater cooperation. Now, NATO is mentioned. Many member states want just one single set of forces, have just one single set of forces. So they are made available to the EU, NATO, or a coalition of the willing. The EU is looking at planning financing for EU research into defence. We have a budget line on defence and defence research. That's part of a pilot project in the 2015-2016 budgets. The aim is that for the next financing period we'll have 500 million each year earmarked for defence. The thinking here is very clear. If countries cooperate on research, then they're going to do so on development and military and other issues. Let me say something now about the European Defence Initiative, the EDIDP. Money is already to be made available. Research and this initiative is to be welcomed because the Commission will ensure that member states do not ease up on joint initiatives here. National defence ministries will work together on public procurement. Now back to PESCO. Together with González Pons, in March this year, I outlined our Parliament perception of PESCO. It's more ambitious than what has been agreed here. PESCO is more than PEPCO, the permanent project coordination. I am pleased that the Council at yesterday's meeting picked up on one of our key demands, which is to look at the cost of structured cooperation and to ensure that it's paid from the EU defence general budget. I am looking forward now to Commissioner Oettinger's proposal to finance PESCO. Together with Council, we in Parliament will be required to ensure that budget requirements are met swiftly. We want to ensure that we have a user-friendly approach. Recent proposal from Commission and Council will allow a countdown to the European Defence Initiative in Union. We now need to ensure that all loose ends are tied up in an EU white paper so that we can work for our citizens and ensure a way forward to a defence union in a way that is explained clearly to our citizens. And I look forward to your support. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole Galler. E adesso...
Thank you, Mr. Galler. I'll now give the floor to Vice President Mogherini, who as High Representative has chosen to sit in the Council bench.
Prego, a lei la parola.
Grazie, Presidente. Sa che di solito mi siedo...
Well, I know I normally sit on the Commission side, but for this debate, I think it's more institutionally correct for me to address the House from this side. So I've got at least 2 or 3 hats.
David McAllister and Michael Gahler for their great work, and the entire Parliament for an excellent, long-standing work. And looking at your reports, I see, first of all, a very strong consensus among us on how crucial our unity has become for our European citizens and for the entire world. There is a need for the European Union as a force for peace and security. There is a need for us to be a credible and reliable power on the global scene, a rational, wise, calm one. So I'm glad that your reports also demonstrate a great ambition, the ambition to make our union even stronger so that we can take up this role at full. Because this is exactly what the situation requires. When we look at the world around us, we see not just uncertainty, not just unpredictability, but confusion, and sometimes a very dangerous one. This is why we're becoming more and more a point of reference for so many around the world, because we are reliable and our partners know where we stand. We are predictable because we are open about our interests and values. We are cooperative, and our friends know that they can always count on us. When others have put into question the United Nations and multilateralism, we have decided to invest even more strongly in them. Not only have we supported Antonio Guterres and his work for reforming the UN system, we've also worked with UN agencies all around the world, and particularly with the UNHCR and the International Organization for Migration. When we set up our own initiative for the future of Syria and the region with the Brussels process, we did it to support the Geneva talks led by the United Nations with all possible means and in strong coordination with them. We have stood by the nuclear deal with Iran, and we are working for a peaceful solution of the crisis with North Korea. We have invested in the UN agenda for sustainable development. We've put our relationship with Africa on a more equal footing with so many joint initiatives, from our support to the G5 Sahel Joint Military Force to the European External Investment Plan. We have invested in resilience, for instance, with our Eastern partners, working on our youth, on the fight against corruption, on energy sector reform, on strategic communications. And we have continued to be a force for peace and reconciliation, starting with our own region, Europe, with the Western Balkans and their credible path towards our European Union. We have become an indispensable partner for peace and reconciliation, for a more effective multilateralism, for sustainable development. And we've also become an indispensable partner and power for international security and a global security provider. In today's world, security and development go hand in hand, and so hard and soft power must also go hand in hand. Our work on security and defence is part of this broader picture. It has nothing to do with the militarisation of our union. We are not turning our union into a military alliance. But if we want to help our African partners, whose growth is hampered by insecurity, or if we want to make sure that instability abroad does not affect our own citizens, then we also need to be a credible military actor, using all our tools, including the military ones, and using them the European way, which means for peace, for development, for people's rights, wisely and in a cooperative manner. This year, our common defence has taken steps forward that seemed unthinkable just a few months ago. The Gahler report is very ambitious, and I think these are the right times to be ambitious and daring. Today, the main building blocks of a European Union of security and defence are finally there. We can now research and develop our defence capabilities together. We can buy together to ensure that we have the capabilities we need and spending efficiently. We can act together to manage or prevent crises, to strengthen our partners, to make our citizens more secure. To get there, we have set up in just 1 year, even if this is built on many long years of parliamentary work, and not only in Parliament, but we've set up in just 1 year an impressive number of new tools and initiatives. All of them seemed impossible just a few months ago, just last year when we were holding this very same debate in this hemicycle. And we have done that while bringing our cooperation with NATO to an unprecedented level. Last year, we announced 42 joint actions with NATO, we have implemented them. I was reporting about that implementation with NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg just last week. By the way, let me take this opportunity to congratulate him on the extension of his mandate to 2020. And last week, at the NATO ministerial meeting, we agreed together 32 more actions. So our NATO partners know that a stronger European Union makes NATO stronger, because our member states and NATO allies have one set of forces, as you mentioned, that can be used in different environments, different frameworks, and our organisations can only be complementary. Coming to the tools we have put in place during this year of work. First, we created the first ever command centre for our military training and advisory missions. I have the impression that the demand for our military and civilian missions can only grow in the future, and now we have the right structures to plan and command our missions. Second, with the European Commission, and here I should jump on the other side of the hemicycle, President, we have set up a European Defence Fund. For the first time ever, the European Commission is committing common resources to invest in defence, not to militarise our budget, but on the contrary, to help member states spend better on defence by spending together. Third, we have established a coordinated annual review on national defence budgets, for which a trial run has just been launched, and the first progress report is planned for November next year. And of course, the most historic step. Just yesterday, the Foreign Affairs Council activated a permanent structured cooperation on defence. This was unimaginable just a few months ago, not to mention at the beginning of my mandate, when I remember that very well. I mentioned during my hearing in your joint commissions, and many of you might remember that as well, I mentioned, I guess to a question of Danjean, that I would have worked to make it possible to use all instruments that the Lisbon Treaty gives us, and we did. We did it in the most ambitious and inclusive manner, with 25 member states from the very beginning launching PESCO together. The 25 have taken binding commitments to improving their cooperation, and the progress of these commitments will be assessed regularly. We will start with the first set of 17 projects. These are very practical programmes. They will facilitate cooperation between our armed forces, fill some gaps in our capabilities, and make our European defence spending much more efficient. I mentioned it several times. We have an investment gap across the Atlantic. The Europeans invest 50% of what the Americans invest on defence, but the output gap is much more impressive, because what we get out of our investment is 15% of what the Americans get. So here is where we can act at the European Union level to make our investments in defence more efficient. These projects span from a common military training to new technologies for protecting our critical infrastructures, to providing medical support to our operations, and I could continue. The possibilities of the permanent structured cooperation are immense, and they will be even greater if we manage to make the permanent structured cooperation work together with all our new defence tools. The member states that have launched the permanent structured cooperation have committed to fully participating in the comprehensive annual review on defence, and they will resort to the European Defence Fund whenever possible. The Defence Fund could be used to create a bonus for projects undertaken in the permanent structured cooperation framework. And the coordinated review will help us identify new fields for cooperation so that permanent structured cooperation can step in. Obviously, these initiatives will have to be developed in coherence and using all possible synergies. But I believe that is exactly what the Lisbon Treaty had in mind when creating the, actually not double but triple-hatted High Representative, Vice President of the Commission and Head of the European Defence Agency. And this is why actually I should do my speech somewhere in between. Because I think that this work we've done this year has also an institutional value, to show that the different institutions we have can join forces in a coordinated manner towards one objective and delivering results that were considered to be impossible to achieve. Now, I must confess, in this moment, I am divided between two different personal feelings. On the one hand, I think habemus papa. white smoke, mission accomplished. But no time to celebrate. It's true, we made it. It's historic. It's big. But at the same time, the real work is just about to begin. And I think we have to be aware that this is a new chapter in the history of the European Union. But today we have the paper, we have the ink, and we have a good story to tell. So we have work to do, and I think we have to look immediately from today, the day after the decision on the permanent structured cooperation was formally taken in the Council yesterday, we have to look immediately at the next steps. So it is not only about the permanent structured cooperation and its possibilities, the concrete projects and many more others, but it is also other fields of action that will be on our agenda in the year to come. The work on our battle groups, for instance, is not finalised yet. And I hope and I encourage Member States to be ambitious and to achieve progress in the Athena Committee by the end of this year or early 2018. And on top of that, we are also working on new proposals on how to fund together our work on security and defence. Together with NATO, we are also working to improve military mobility inside the European Union. And this project also fits very well within our defence cooperation agenda. And last but not least at all, I would like to see in the next months progress on our civilian missions and capabilities too, because security threats have changed and this makes our civilian engagement even more important. You think of our new mission to support the security sector reform and stabilisation in Iraq, or to our long-standing civilian commitment in the Balkans or in Eastern Europe, you all realise that these are key elements of our work on security. So the European way to security and defence lies precisely in the careful and wise mix between targeted military and civilian actions. That is what makes the European Union a unique security interlocutor and player in the world. So in 3 years of common work since I started, our European security and defence, our European Union of security and defence has advanced enormously. I would say we have achieved more in these last 3 years, in this last year, than in the previous 30 or 60 years. And it makes me proud, even as an Italian, that this happens in the year of the 60th anniversary of the Treaties of Rome. That was part of the dreams of our founding fathers and mothers. But again, we have to look at the next 60 years. This should make us proud, and it should make us more aware of our potential and give us the energy, the determination and the hope that we will need to continue strengthening the European Union as a global player. Because, let me finish with this, I've always been convinced, and even more today, that the European Union is what we make of it. We decided to change things together in this field, and we did it. And now we are ready to work and shape our next steps towards a European Union of security and defence, and I'm sure we will continue to work together and do it also in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Grazie. Grazie.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vice President Mogherini. The floor now goes... Oh, I don't see Mr. Arthuis here in the room on behalf of the Budgets Committee. So we'll now hear from the political groups. I'll remind you that at this stage we will not be accepting any more blue cards because it's already a very long debate and time is pressing. On behalf of the EPP Group, Mr. Salafranca, 1 minute 30.
Thank you, President. High Representative, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to, first of all, recognise and welcome the work that's been done by the rapporteurs, Mr. Gahler and Mr. McAllister. I think that the conclusion that we can draw from both reports is that in times of uncertainty, as the High Representative was saying, no member state can alone solve the challenges that we face. This afternoon, we'll be discussing the nuclear agreement with Iran, which we know that the Americans are calling into question. And so the analysis is same for the European member states and the rest of the world. Today, unilateralism, even from the most prosperous countries, is not possible. I think Mr. McAllister's recommendation in his report is correct. We have to have a clear and shared diagnosis of the challenges that we face, particularly when it comes to cyber warfare. We also have to consolidate the EU project through creating new capacities, and particularly through enhanced cooperation. And we also have to strengthen our alliances with strategic partners and NATO. As Mrs. Mogherini said, we can't rest on our laurels. There's still a great deal to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Socialist and Democrat Group, Mr. Bostinaro, 2 minutes. Victor.
Presidente, dear Madam High Representative, dear Federica, or shall I call you Mrs. Ubiquity because you have to run from one corner to another. Dear colleagues, today we are debating two of the most important reports this Parliament ever debated. The report of Mr. McAllister and the report of Mr. Gahler. As the complex security challenges are becoming more and more serious in our neighbourhood and beyond, the EU remains, as you rightly mentioned recently, Madam High Representative, the most